Welcome to Nerdlandia.
Welcome to Nerdlandia, where intelligence is our dump stat of choice. I'm your host, Emily Case Buskirk. In today's episode, I'm taking on the topic of Dungeons and Dragons. But since I don't have a whole lot of experience myself, I brought in an expert. Ross Struss is an experienced dungeon master and player who also has his own podcast called Bards and Barrels. We talk about how D&D is an amazing medium for shared storytelling experiences, and also enjoy some beers from a local brewery. But if beer isn't your thing, no worries. Just skip ahead to the 5-minute mark. Whether you're a veteran player or have only ever heard of D&D, this conversation should have a little something for everyone to enjoy. Well, I'm going to open up my beer in the style of your show.
There you go. There's the opening crack right
technique.
there. That was good. It was a good pull. It was perfect. Strong throughout. Loud crack. I love it.
Excellent.
It was perfect.
I'm really happy to be here and talk about beer a little bit. So one of the ways that Jared, my spouse, and I connected is through craft beer, and he was a bartender for a while. I mean, we just love spending time at breweries around the city and surrounding areas and just enjoying all the different styles that are out there.
I think it's a lot of fun to be in Nebraska right now because the craft brew scene. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's really exploding everywhere around the state.
Totally.
Nebraska is one of those places where the small town identity is such a big thing in so many places around here that having that brewery to just add to the identity, like here in Hastings, we have two excellent breweries. We have Steeple Brewing and we have First Street Brewing, and both of those just everybody loves them. I don't know anybody who typically goes to one and doesn't go to the other on the same night, afternoon, whatever it is. And it's just a really cool time to be a part of that.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, now when we go back to central Nebraska to visit families, we can look forward to hanging out at a brewery, and it's just such a great space. But yeah, so the beer we're enjoying today is from one of my favorite central Nebraska breweries, which is First Street. So we're having the Back Alley Porter. It's kind of one of their standards. And one of the things I really like is that there's definitely a heavy coffee flavor, but there's also a little bit of a smoky taste too. I haven't had this in a little while, and that was one thing I noticed when I tried that again just now, and it's just so nice.
Yeah, the roast he has on the grain in the Back Alley Porter is it brings out some very unique flavors. It does definitely taste like coffee. It has almost a caramely note to it. Like
Yeah.
it's not sweet, so don't anybody listening, don't take that as this beer being sweet. But I know in their official description they say there's stone fruit in here. I would say it's more raisiny, almost like how
Yeah,
raisin
yeah,
has
I
a
would
really
agree.
deep flavor to it is in there. I also did not know the story behind this beer that Nathan actually roasted the grains in the ovens at Back Alley Bakery, which is a Hastings staple. And that's where he did the original roasting for this, which
I
is
love that.
really cool because it's a small business and another small business in town.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. This is the cornerstone quintessential beer at First Street. It's like if you have not had the Back Alley Porter, you need to go try this one out. It's pretty dang good.
100%. What do you think makes beer and D&D go together so well?
That's a really heavy question, and that could have a very long, convoluted answer. But short and sweet on that one. I think from the D&D perspective, what makes beer go well with D&D is its long history with taverns and things like that. So anybody who's ever played D&D has visited the tavern where, you go grab a pint, and that's where you get your first little bit of information that really sends you on your way in a campaign that you're doing. From a personal perspective, and D&D the game, not D&D like in the campaign, beer itself has always been a means to gather, right? And so when you think about a D&D table, you're bringing 4, 5, 6 friends together, and you're sitting around and you're probably having a beer while you play the game. And that's the cornerstone of playing the game itself, is get your friends together and go on this shared adventure or storytelling journey together. That's really what it is. And if beer is a part of that, that's even better. Now, if you're underage and you're listening to this show, don't please don't drink beer. But for everybody else that's of age, please have a pint while you play the game. It's amazing to do that.
Yes, thanks for adding that disclaimer. Very important.
Right.
On that note, when are you planning to introduce your son to D&D? Or have you done that
Oh,
already?
so no, so he knows that I like Dungeons and Dragons. So I have a 4-year-old. He doesn't really know what Dungeons and Dragons is, but oh, it's back here. I'm not gonna grab it right now, but I have like a stuffed dragon. And
Oh my
anytime like he sees a dragon or a dinosaur, he'll be like, "Is this your Dungeons and Dragons?" I'm like, "Oh, buddy, like soon, soon." I mean, he likes to tell stories. It's really fun to listen to him. He's really into dinosaurs right now, and dragons being a very close tangent to that. It's a lot of fun to hear him tell stories. So I think he's not that far off. I know of somebody who that we had on the show recently who actually is starting a kids D&D campaign. So
That's
I'm really
awesome.
hoping that once he gets that going, we can have a little conversation about how he did that because there are a lot of very adult themes within D&D.
Fair.
I mean, there's killing and drinking and all kinds of things like that. But I mean, there's even more beyond that that we could talk about. But uh, probably not super appropriate for kids, little kids. But there's certainly ways that you could play out the damsel in distress or the typical fairy tale type stories that would be fun to do with kids. And we're not far off. Let me put it that way to answer your question.
100%. You could totally make this tailored campaign for him of like Dungeons and Dinos.
That we could totally do that. That would be a blast. Yes. I love that idea, actually. I'm gonna write that down right now.
Amazing. It's free. You can take it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Royalty free.
Yep. When were you first introduced to D&D?
I feel like I've known about the game for a long time, probably since high school at least. So we're talking, mid 2000s. The game's been around since the 70s.
Right.
Um, as far as like playing it though, it really didn't happen until about 2019. So right before COVID, that winter before we'd been playing, like our friends group had been playing a lot of board games, not necessarily role playing board games, but games with missions, Star Wars board games, things like that. um, it was just like, what's the next step for us? Like, what would be the next fun thing to play that's maybe not 5 missions and you're done? Like, how can we get something that takes a little bit longer? And so we actually, the first campaign that we did was the Rick and Morty box set for
Oh,
Dungeons and
nice.
Dragons, which
Yeah.
is basically just a dungeon. That's all it is, and it's got a lot of flavor from the show and stuff like that. It has pre-built characters that are characters from the show and things like that, and it was a blast. We really enjoyed that, and when it took us 3 or 4 nights to get through that. It wasn't a super long one, but then that's when we decided, hey, let's try to play the actual game. And we ordered some books and built some characters and got into it. So that was winter of 2019 into early 2020 is when we really got into playing the first time. And then we ended up taking a break pretty quick because of COVID and we all had kids
Right.
and stuff like that. So
Right.
it's evolved some since then, how much we play, but that's really where we got into it for the first time. It was somewhat getting over like the nerdy factor too, because I feel like in high school you're like, oh, I am not that big of a nerd. I'm not going to play Dungeons and Dragons, and here I am wearing a Dungeons and Dragons shirt, so that should tell you everything you need to know about. I'm over that hump and 5 miles down the road. I'm pretty sure.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah. I mean, we're at the point where we're just like embracing it. I love the idea of just kind of getting into it through these sort of pre-made kits where they kind of make some shortcuts for you, so you kind of get a sense for what it's like before you jump into the deep end
well,
because there can be a bit of a learning curve. I have
mhm,
done one campaign. It was a one shot
mhm.
that my friend DM'd, and it was a lot of fun. Like most people will say, the scheduling is probably the hardest part about it.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is like when you're playing with 4 and 5 people, like getting everybody on the same schedule to
Mhm.
everybody's lives. We're in a campaign right now that I'm DMing where my niece, nephew, and my niece's fiance, and then Phil and Brett, who are on the show with me. So we have not played since Christmas with them. So I am definitely feeling the struggle deep down on that campaign, but we'll get back to
Yeah,
it eventually.
yeah, I get that.
It's a campaign that I've run partially before. It's Curse of Strahd. So if you're into like horror type themes and stuff like that and vampires, it was probably right up your alley. I would not suggest it for beginners, beginner DMs particularly. Beginner players are probably okay, but beginner DMs,
Yeah,
it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of little quirky things that are in that one that stray a little bit from some of the rules that make it a really interesting campaign. It's a ton of fun, don't get me wrong, but just know if it's your first DMing campaign, you're going to be putting in a lot of work to get where you want to be with that.
yeah, yeah. I've heard of it. Another thing I was wondering about, do you feel more comfortable as a DM or in the role of an improvisational player?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. I don't know if I want to answer that. So I'm in a campaign right now that is about ready to restart after about a 8-month break. Prior to that, we had been playing that campaign for 2.5 years. The first half of this campaign was pre-written. We ran the Descent into Avernus campaign setting that is out there. It was a ton of fun. We loved the characters that we had. We all have very good chemistry together. So it's just a ton of fun. And Phil is actually the DM for that one. And Phil is a great DM. And so we took a little break, mostly to give him a break because after 2.5 years, you want to like make sure your DM is comfortable before you move on. And we kind of determined that we're moving into the world of homebrew for this
Mhm.
next part. So we're taking the same characters. The first part of this, the pre-written campaign is like essentially our backstory now, and we're building off that story and going into completely homebrew territory and completely made up by us kind of campaign. So it's been a really interesting process to help him come up with where that story is going to go, but not
Yeah.
know so much from a player perspective that it ruins the
Right.
story for me. So it's like trying to help him so he doesn't carry the burden of having to come up with all the stuff. So it's been an interesting give and take with him, and it's been a lot of fun.
Have you created any of your own homebrew campaigns before?
Nope. So this is brand new to us,
Oh,
and
wow.
I think we got a little lucky because we're not venturing off the path so much as creating our completely like a completely original world, much like Critical Role does in
Mhm.
like Tal'Dori, which is now also a campaign setting that you can go play in. We're not doing that, so I think that kind of saved everybody's sanity a little bit because we're not having to start from scratch,
Yeah.
but still coming up with like plot points and what are the hooks to like get us in and keep us going. That's been a lot of fun to get into that.
Nice. What's your character like in that campaign?
My character in that campaign, his name is Thorn Duskbane, and Thorn, if you think of Thor, he is very similar to Thor. I would say they have very different characteristics in terms of their personalities. I think Thorn's a little smarter than Thor is. But in terms of like being that holy type person, cleric, Thorn's a paladin, so that's definitely probably where Thor falls in if you're trying to place Marvel characters into the D&D realm. But he has a very interesting relationship with his deity. And it's very close. And going into this next phase of this campaign, he's going to lose that connection.
Oh.
This is the little bit that I know. So if any of the guys are listening, don't listen too closely. But uh, he's gonna lose that connection, and I'm not gonna say why, but it's gonna be interesting to see how he reacts to that, and I'm really excited to role play that,
He's gonna be a dynamic character.
and it'll be interesting to see how his speaking of dynamics, how his character dynamics work with the other players.
Where do you look for inspiration or even information for campaigns and character creation?
Gosh, I think it's everywhere. I think it's in the movies that we watch, the books that we read. Anymore, I feel like when I go to find something to read or something to watch, I'm almost watching out for how can I repurpose that into something, or oh, that character would make a really interesting D&D character or something like that.
Yeah.
I think some of the things that I've watched as of late that have influenced that quite a bit. Dune Part 2 that just came out. I'm a big fan of Dune. I'm reading through the first book right now. So I think that's something that could influence how I do that. Marvel movies have been a big influence on some of our storytelling. And then the old cornerstones too, right? So like Lord of the Rings,
Oh,
Harry
yeah.
Potter, Game of Thrones, those are all big influences. I mean, just because they already almost live in that area where you're telling stories already. So it's very easy to like take that character and recreate them because they already swing swords and wear furs and live in that kind of feudal lifestyle anyway. So it's yeah, it's all around us. I think that's the best way to put it in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, 100%. Do you have any characters or campaigns that you're just super proud of that, they would be in your Hall of Fame?
Oh gosh, that Descent into Avernus campaign we did with the guys was a blast, and I would put that up against any story that's out there. Some of the antics that we got into, and we blew ourselves up at one point, and we got saved by my deity. But that was a lot of negotiating with Phil, our DM, to not make us all die. So I think there was a lot of fun had in that one. Um, but the Curse of Strahd one is a lot of fun as well. and I think it's important to throw that one in there because that's the primary one that I've DM'd the most, and just from that side of the table, I really enjoy that one. So I think those 2 are definitely up there. I've run some starter campaigns. I've run, a couple one shots that I've come up with before. So when you ask me if we've done homebrew, so we've done a few like homebrew one shots, but not like a full campaign
Sure.
homebrew necessarily.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's been yeah, I would say those 2 are probably at my top as far as Hall of Fame goes.
Nice.
Character wise, I played with Thorn almost exclusively, which is kind of funny. Right now, we're in our campaign that we're doing in the break is called Light of Xeraxis, which is D&D in space, which is a ton of fun.
Ooh.
Um, and the character that I'm playing there, his name is Rothan Night Spider, and he's a cool character. I found out I do not like playing rogues, is what I found out. For
Yeah.
whatever reason, I think it's that I like playing with magic, and so the fact that rogues don't have hardly any magic that they can use at all makes it really tough for me. But as far as a role playing character, Rhodey, who is that's what I call him for short, is probably one of my favorite characters to play, just because he's been in prison. He's almost if you think of Rocket from Guardians of the Galaxy, he would be very similar to Rocket, like just a jaded, I've been in prison, I know everybody, and I don't like anybody kind of guy, except for my best friend. And other than him, I don't like anybody kind of character. And he's been
Yeah.
a lot of fun to play. So
Yeah, just a super rapscallion type. Have you ever, commissioned either of those characters, to an artist to draw them, or have you visualized any parts of your D&D storytelling like that?
we have not. We have talked a lot about having when we finished that last campaign, we talked a lot about having like our group photo commissioned because it would be
Yeah.
fun. It would be fun to have that. I think that could still happen. We have not ventured down that road. Now, with that said, I think all of us, at least I can speak for myself, have definitely visualized like what our characters look like, and I've written down like pretty detailed descriptions of what Thorn looks like. Like it's the short dark hair, the close cut beard. He's an Asimar, which is a human variant where they have like a celestial bloodline.
Mhm.
So he has like the ability to like make his eyes glow and stuff like that to try to intimidate people and become very angelic looking and things like that. And he wears plate armor, so he's like a very prototypical knight type thing. So while we haven't had anything commissioned, I think we've all kind of thought that out. Now, with that said, we have gotten a little artistic as of late. One of the things when Phil and I had a brainstorming session to get into what the second half of this campaign was going to look like, because it's all going to be homebrew, right? Which, by the way, the title of that is Ragnarok: Fall of the Gods. So super excited about that. We even made a logo for it. But while we were going through that process. So one of the things that we got into while we were having a brainstorming session was we had basically spent the time like going through some books and writing down some ideas. And when we got to the end, I was like, what if Thorn wrote a letter to the other guys? And this was like the last thing they heard from him. And so Melissa, my wife, had gotten these like they're like marker brushes to like do calligraphy with and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so she had gotten those, so I ran and grabbed those because luckily I knew where they were, and, like, I wrote out this letter that had, like, some symbols and stuff in it that they would have to figure out. The other thing that we did was I went and found some red paint, and we, like, splattered some red paint on this, so it looked like it was bloody, and it's like, that was the first time other than, like, doing some, like, building tiles, for, like, playing on or things like that, that was
Yeah.
the first time we had done something, like, super artistic ourselves. Because you can buy things like that for different campaigns. Like you can buy the pre-made letters and stuff to hand to your party, but this was the first time we had made something to ourselves. But the best part of this was we delivered them, hand delivered them to the people, and we had like a line that we had to say to them when we hand delivered it.
Okay.
So I delivered mine to Brett because Brett was here in town, and like I acted like when I pulled in, it was really cold, and Brett like came out to the car to pick this up, and he like wanted to have like a conversation about the weather that day, and I'm like, no, are you Ari? He's like, yes, and I'm like, this letter came by Raven this morning, and I handed it to him, and I backed out of the driveway, which I think he was super confused, but then when he saw what it was, like I got messages with like big smile emojis and everything. Like he was so excited to get that. And then what makes it even cooler is it spurred other letters to happen.
That's
So, like,
awesome.
within our Discord channel, like, the other 3, like, started writing letters to each other, like, "What the heck is this? Have you guys figured it out? Do you have the same letter?" And I have said nothing because Thorn doesn't know that they got it or that they're communicating about it. So we're trying to keep this as close to the story and as close to the vest as we possibly can to kinda let them work it out and play into the story, and hopefully it's given Phil some cool ideas and stuff he can run with too. So it's, like, really playing into that, you know, group storytelling that D&D really is. So,
Yes, letters from Thorn. And it sounds like everybody's really psyched to engage with it that way. I think
yeah.
that's what I like about getting creative with that. That is just something I always really enjoy about it is getting to actually see that like brought to life because I mean the characters interacting with each other and the narrative from the DMs that means a lot too. But I think when you can bring that extra dimension in, it's just so cool.
It completely changes it. Like, it's like almost like that final step to bringing them to life is actually seeing them, and I really hope it's at some point I can make that happen for Thorn. I think that'd be really cool. So,
I was gonna ask this before, so
mhm.
are there any character deaths that will always haunt you then, or even as a DM, like did you have to kill off a character and you just always regret that?
Oh boy. I don't think I have ever had to kill off a character, at least not yet. So I come from
Wow.
a DMing standpoint where I try not to, unless you do something really dumb and you knew what you were getting into. I try not to kill characters because that's I think there's a lot of stereotyping around that when you play the game, the dungeon master is the enemy. And that is not the case. The dungeon master is the narrator of the story. He's playing all the parts, he's keeping things moving, he's the guide, right?
Yeah.
But he's not the enemy, even though sometimes he has to be. With that said, if you do something really dumb and you've been warned several times, I have put the hurt on people before and brought them to death's doorstep, but I have never killed anybody.
Okay,
Uh,
okay. You're a
now
merciful god.
yeah, I try to be, you know? Now in games that I've played in, I would say it's very much the same way because Phil has been the main DM that I've played with. And he and I have a very similar mindset in the sense that you try to give them a way out, right? So, with that said, there was a time in one of our campaigns where Brett's character, Brett, who is on Bards and Barrels as well, we have like this little annoying thing that we go back and forth with, and he wanted to light a torch wherever we were. Now, Phil had said several times that there was a strange smell in this sewer dungeon area where we were. And so me being a nice guy, I picked up a skull because I think there was also like a catacomb or something, and I casted light on it and I made it glow and I tossed it to Ari and he didn't like it. It freaked him out. And so he lit a torch anyway, which subsequently blew up the entire room and nearly killed us all. And there were several saves that had to be made and we all failed them. But somehow after that session was over, there was a lot of negotiating in the Discord channel about, hey, what if we do this so we don't end this, 3 sessions into this campaign that did end up taking 2.5 years. So it's like it was worth it to not kill us, I think. So it's just one of those things. Like we negotiated it out, and my deity ended up saving us. But there were some ominous warnings about that was going to be the
Mm.
last time and stuff like that. That Phil put out there. I don't think he ever held us to any of the things that he said at that time, but it's whatever. So no, as far as deaths, we have not run into too many deaths. There's been some NPC deaths that I
Oh,
don't want to
those
say
are always
hurt.
so tragic.
Yes, and so one in particular was on the campaign we're doing right now, The Light of Xeraxis. So, gosh, there was a point where we were in, I think it was Waterdeep, and we had to get out of Waterdeep, and we found this ship that could fly in space. That was a good roll. We happened to find it, and we were just in the right place at the right time. But the captain saved us. We saved her a couple times, and then we got to probably one of the bigger battles toward the end, and she died, and that one hurt. But I think the one of the players in the campaign, I made an offhand comment to him about he should do the funeral or something like that, and then he rolled very badly, and Phil made him do the funeral. So this tragic death ended up having this very comedic funeral, and it was not the prettiest thing that had ever happened, but it was pretty hilarious, and it was probably not a fitting end to somebody who had saved our lives on multiple
Ah,
occasions.
She
It
didn't
was so
deserve that send off.
no, no, not really, not at all.
So
I think
sad.
we did put her on a funeral pyre and, like, send her out the correct way, but the funeral was not good. So
R.I.P. Your
right.
death was not in vain.
Now it helps me get a little sleep when I can't even honestly remember her name, so it's fine.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
fine.
Such a great character, whatever her name was.
Uh-huh, yep, that's exactly right, and
Uh,
that's very fitting for my character to not remember her name, so I thought that was appropriate,
okay.
actually.
Okay. On brand. That's fine. Well, in addition to the storytelling aspect of D&D, it seems that through Bards and Barrels, your podcast, you're also trying to educate people and share information about D&D, which I just think is really cool. For you, what do you think provides that spark to, educate the masses on on D&D?
So I think to understand that, you have to understand why we started the show in the first place, and ironically, or not ironically, at least coming full circle, it comes back to beer in a lot of
Oh
ways
wow.
because Brett and Phil and I used to get together weekly and go out for beers, and what we found was when we would go out, we would be sitting there having a nice pint of whatever wherever here in town, and the conversation would always end up talking about D&D at some point. It'd be talking about one of our campaigns, it'd be talking about this rule or this tweet that we saw about somebody, how they play a certain way. And so we were like, gosh, if we do this every week, we could buy some equipment and have beers and talk about D&D and then share these conversations with the world.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
Totally.
that's what kicked off the show. We don't really have a mission per se, but if we did have a mission, I would say it's probably making the game as accessible as we can to people who just don't know about it, or they know about it and they're afraid or intimidated of the game.
Yeah.
Because like when you think about it, you don't need all those books, but you can see all my books back here on this shelf right here, and the shelf goes a long way that way. So I own a lot of them, and I think that is intimidating to people because they go to Walmart or they go to their bookstore and they see, gosh, that book is $45 to $50, depending on where you buy it. You can buy them on Amazon for $30, but that's still a lot of money for some people. What they don't know is you can go online to D&D Beyond and find the starter manual, and you can essentially play the game for free from right there. And so a lot of our first season was talking about character building and playing the game with nothing but that starter manual. Just showing people, hey, you can sit down and play this game. If it's interesting to you, you should absolutely be sitting down and doing this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that was step one. And then now that we've gotten through some of that, we're trying to get into like some of the deeper things. You don't realize how much there is to playing the game until you're trying to explain to somebody how to play it.
Yeah.
So it's like you try to explain from the player perspective, but then you have to turn around and you have to explain from the DM perspective too, because you can't really play one without the other.
Right.
And both of those are complex. And then also, you do at some point have to go beyond that starter manual in a lot of ways. You need to get into those books because they provide a breadth of information that you really don't have access to. There are places online where you can go find where people have posted books and posted sections and things like that that you can utilize for sure. But at the end of the day, it probably does help to actually have a copy or a digital copy of the book to use. And so that's the cornerstone of the show, is just educate and let people know that this isn't as intimidating as you think it is. So
So you're saying it all started in a tavern.
it did all start in a tavern. Yes, absolutely it did.
Love that. Well, and I just also like that you're distilling volumes and volumes of information in a very friendly and conversational way. That's really cool to see that.
I think it's a lot of fun also to say, this is crap. Like, yes, it's in here, you can use it, but at the end of the day, don't worry about X, Y, or Z because it's not that crucial to what you're doing. And I think that's the other piece of the puzzle, is like there's a lot of information out there. Like what is good, what's not good, and what do you really need versus what can you just kind of shuffle to the back until later kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So removing some of those perceived hurdles, so to
Right.
speak. What's coming up next for your show?
Oh gosh. So right now we're working on planning out season 3, which is hard to believe that I'm even saying those words.
Yeah, well, you just celebrated 1 year. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. When we first started this, we were going to be happy that we got 10 episodes into it, and then now we've reached a year. We're 40 episodes in, and we're planning out season 3. In season 2, we added the opening crack, which was our beer reviews, because we really wanted to get back to what started this all, like that story that I just told, and get back to like beer being the cornerstone of what we do. And so we added that this year. And then season 3, kind of what we're thinking is we're going to add some live play in, because for as much as we talk about the game, you really don't ever hear us play the game. And so we want people to hear us play the game. And then we're going to add one more segment side bonus show that's going to be called the bottom of the barrel. We haven't really piloted this out yet, but it's going to be where we just talk about some of the things that influence what we put in our D&D games. So
Oh,
like
nice.
if we go see Dune, or we watched Lord of the Rings for the thousandth time, but we saw
Yes.
something we really want to incorporate, we wanted a place where we could put that, because it really doesn't fit in the normal show unless the context of the show makes sense for what we're
Right.
talking about there, and it doesn't really make sense in the beer show. So we wanted to provide a platform where we could talk about some of those pop culture things that we're constantly consuming and seeing. That way we could tell everybody about it. If we play a cool board game that has a premise that we can use, or a mechanic that we can use in D&D, we want to be able to tell people about that, and not just necessarily in like short form like YouTube or something like that. We wanted an actual like piece of the show where we could tell people about that. So that's going to be fun.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited to see what happens. Is there anything else you wanted to share about D&D storytelling or Bards and Barrels?
Oh gosh. Well, as far as Bards and Barrels goes, if everybody wants to give us a listen, absolutely, you can find us wherever podcasts can be found. That's amazing. You can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on Instagram, and then our YouTube page. So if you want to keep up with what we're doing, that would be fantastic. But as far as D&D goes, there's going to be a lot of changes coming to D&D over the next 2 to 3 years. So they're actually getting ready to release one D&D, which is not a new version of D&D, but is also still kind of a new version to D&D. So all the things we've been talking about may change very slightly. And so it's going to, if anything, I guess it's job security in a way for the show, is that we're going to have lots of things to talk about and how they've been tweaking these rules. But uh, I would go back to that piece of advice I gave everybody. Even though things are changing and this things may be in flux over the next 6 to 8 months with Dungeons and Dragons, get into it, try it, find somebody that's been playing for a while and just experience it. Because once you get to that point, it's likely that you're going to be playing for a while. So
Yes. My advice to somebody who is like very unfamiliar with the game is just make friends with somebody who has DM'd a campaign and just hop on their coattails.
right, absolutely.
Because they're gonna do the heavy lifting and you get to make a character, it's super fun, and just
Yep.
see how the story goes.
You'd be surprised how many people around you play Dungeons and Dragons that have never really told you they play Dungeons and Dragons.
They hide it for the from the stigma and shame, but
Yep,
embrace the nerdiness, okay? It's just too much fun.
that's right. Exactly. 100% agree.
That leads us into the recurring ending segment of Nerdlandia, which is current favorites. What's your favorite thing in the moment, Ross?
Oh gosh. Oh, so it's Dune. Dune has my whole attention. Okay, I take that back. It's Dune and the Three Body Problem on Netflix. So I read the Three Body Problem book probably 3 years ago, and it's a very it's science fiction. It's a very complex book because there's a lot of time jumping where they're trying to tell this story in 60s China while also paralleling that to things going on modern day and stuff like that. The Netflix show does a great job of narrowing that story down and making it digestible with people that you've seen before, like actors and actresses that you've seen before. So I love that. The show is really good so far, so I would highly recommend that. And then Dune is such a complex story. There's so much more to it than either the 80s movie or Dune Part 1 and 2 have told you. I would highly recommend, if you like those, go read the books, because there is so much in there that they just weren't able to put in the movie or whatever it is, and it is fascinating. It's very much a microcosm of the society that we live in now, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, probably not, but here we are. And there's a lot of stories out there like that that are drawing parallels to where we're at. But Dune being one was not something I would ever make that comparison to, but here we are. I just did. So
Crazy.
It is a little insane, but it's the amount of depth that they have in that book is probably rivaled by Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
Would
wow.
be what I would say. So it's kind of crazy.
Now that Dune is on Hulu, I've been wanting to watch it. So my favorite thing of the moment is Dan Pashman's new cookbook, Anything's Possible. He is a podcaster. He has this Sporkful. So he invented a pasta shape like a couple years back. It was really great. And then, of course, since he has a podcast, then he created a series describing how he made this shape and all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into that. This past weekend, I made one of the recipes, and it was tahini chili crisp kind of sauce. Yeah, like super unique and really, really tasty, I gotta say. Like wonderful texture. There was also some fried shallots in there, and just no pasta dish I've ever really had before.
It sounds really good.
Yes. And yeah, I'll share the link with you because I was able to get this just from somewhere online, but it was a nice little test run and just a reminder that, yeah, I need to get the cookbook so I can check out the rest of those recipes.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that this inspires some people to try out D&D.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you for having me on, and I'm hoping you can come on our show soon. I think that would be pretty awesome to have you on. So
I would love to do that. To me, a huge green flag in a person is a willingness to share their knowledge with newbies instead of hoarding it away. Ross definitely passes that test, and he's an amazing source of information on all things D&D. Also, if you couldn't tell, I'm a huge lover of local beer, so it was great to finally talk a bit more about that on the show. You can check out the show notes to connect with Bards and Barrels and learn more about the other things we talked about. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating to help others discover Nerdlandia. Up next, shaping creations from clay. Aaron is a mental health therapist and ceramicist living in St. Peter, Minnesota. He recently reconnected with his passion for pottery after first discovering it 10 years ago. We talk about his creative process, the therapeutic benefits of pottery, and the music that's fueling him in the studio. That conversation will be out May 15th. See you then. Nerdlandia is hosted, produced, and edited by Emily Case Buskirk. Theme song and ending music by Keith West. Cover art by Ellen Stubbings. Additional music by Alex Grohl and Timothy Kulig from Pixabay.
So Dead Man's Run, which we actually covered on our beer side show that we do, is one of my favorite beers of all time. If I had a top 10 list, it would probably be in the top 5. It's an excellent beer. I really enjoy that one.
Yes, I think we're both huge fans because I've also talked about Cosmic Guy on the show, so it's just too good. It's honestly probably my favorite in Lincoln, and I have a lot of favorites, so that's saying something.